For over 40 years, Sir Harry, you've been an outstanding personality in the field of orthopedics. And yet I know you might quite easily become a musician.
Yes, that is true. A childhood injury developed into a tuberculous knee. And I was much restricted in my activities for many years. Missed a lot of schooling, but I read a great deal and became very interested in music. In fact, I wanted to be a composer.
Did you have any real incentive at this time to lead an active life?
Yes, I was spurred on by the example of three athletic brothers. I wanted to do what they could do, but by 1904 I made my choice, the profession of medicine, although I was reluctant to abandon music.
That was rather a surprising choice, really, wasn't it? Because there was no family medical background at all.
No.
Do you think, perhaps consciously or unconsciously, your decision was determined by the experiences which you had with your own physicians and surgeons?
Oh, very probably. I had the good fortune to be a patient of Robert Jones of Liverpool, who was then a young man, but of course destined to be the greatest orthopedic surgeon of all time.
May we come back to Sir Robert Jones later?
Yes, of course.
You went to Manchester University, and during your undergraduate career you picked up many prizes on the way, and then you qualified, and what did you do then?
I did house surgeon jobs in Manchester and in London. I taught anatomy for a year. I got my FRCS and my mastership in surgery.
And were you actually at that time in close touch with Sir Robert Jones?
Not again until 1913. When I was in London, getting further experience with the idea of becoming a general surgeon. Then came the turning point in my career. Dr. Elliot Brackett of Boston, who was attending the International Congress of Medicine, invited me to go to the United States and to work under him in the hospitals there. This was a unique offer. Later in the year, I went to Boston, and I stayed there for 8 months, working in the hospitals. I came back in 1914, and soon after was appointed to the staff of the Ancoats Hospital as a general surgeon. There were no orthopedic departments in the general hospitals outside London at that time, but I had two colleagues, W.R. Douglas and John Morley, who, knowing my interest in orthopedics, turned over the treatment of all fractures to me. This generous and far-sighted action laid the foundation of a very busy orthopedic service at Ancoats, which attracted crippled patients of all ages. Then came the 1914 war. At first I was not accepted for military service, and in the absence of my two colleagues on service in Gallipoli, I carried on the whole surgical work of Ancoats Hospital for a time. Later, when I was commissioned as a captain in the RAMC, I was appointed by Sir Robert Jones to take charge of the orthopedic section of the Army Hospital in Manchester. This special unit of about 250 beds, with other larger units in the country, had been organized by Sir Robert with the powerful support of such leading British surgeons as Sir Barclay Moynihan of Leeds and Sir Harold Styles of Edinburgh.
Was Sir Robert Jones then such a power in the land?
Well, Sir Robert was a many-sided personality. He was a most inspiring and lovable man. As a surgical leader, he was unique. He liked to have around him young men with ideas, and he encouraged them to try out their own techniques, which quite often differed from the classical methods of the great Liverpool school of orthopedics. He was indeed a most tolerant man.
From what you said, it is obvious that Sir Robert Jones exerted a tremendous influence on you and your contemporaries.
Oh yes, he became a world figure, a revered leader as much in the United States as in the United Kingdom.
But in spite of the remarkable organisation which had been built up in the 1914-18 period, is it not true to say that you and your colleagues, in preaching the doctrine of the segregation of fracture units, met with very great resistance?
We did. Surgical specialism was slow to be accepted, particularly in the great teaching hospitals. And it was not until 1934 that I myself was appointed as an orthopedic surgeon to a teaching hospital, the Manchester Royal Infirmary.
What, in your opinion, were the determining factors which eventually led to the general acceptance of the principles propounded by Sir Robert Jones, yourself and your colleagues?
I think there were three main factors. First of all, the success of the regional orthopedic schemes for the treatment of long-term crippling affections. Secondly, the report of a BMA committee in 1935. And thirdly, the report of a government committee on the treatment of accidents in 1937. The 1935 BMA committee recommended very strongly the setting up of specialized fracture units in all hospitals, based on certain principles: segregation, unity of control, and continuity of treatment.
And special mention indeed was made of your work in this 1935 BMA committee.
Yes, because I had set up the first segregated fracture service at Ancoats Hospital in 1914. The result of all this experience was that when the 1939 war came, we had a complete scheme for the specialized treatment of air raid, battle, and industrial injuries. In this section of the emergency medical service, Sir Thomas Fairbank and I myself were the consultant advisors to the government. I am still a consultant advisor in this field.
May we go back to 1939, an important landmark for all of us, and for you?
Yes, because in that year I was appointed the first professor of orthopedic surgery in the University of Manchester. So that the period 1939 to 1945 was a very busy one for me.
Honours have poured in upon you: a knighthood in 1948, election as President of the Royal College of Surgeons of England for 3 years running, a baronetcy in 1958, and in the same year, election as President of the newly formed International Federation of Surgical Colleges. What prodigious changes you've seen over these 40 years, in which you yourself have played so notable a part.
Indeed, yes. The most significant, perhaps, the growth of surgical specialization. And in this movement, I think orthopedics led the way. In this specialty alone, I have lived through great changes in techniques. In the mobilization of fractured bones, for example. The old wooden splints now discarded, then the metal malleable splints, the Robert Jones practice, and the remarkable revival of plaster of Paris in the form of the unpadded plaster splint. In the operative treatment of fractures, the use of new metals. In reconstructive surgery, massive bone grafting made possible by bone banks, and the reconstruction of joints by the insertion of prosthetic substitutes. Then, most important, the widespread application of rehabilitation methods. And finally, the advent of antibiotics, and the remarkable advances in the techniques of resuscitation and anesthesia. All these have made possible a more adequate treatment of the massive injuries of modern road traffic. Thus, there is a continuing need for the education and training of the surgeon and others in this field, and for an organization to deal with these seriously injured people. This problem and allied problems have occupied a great deal of my time since 1952, not only in this country, but all over the world. And thus, you see that all these developments stem from the mind and work of Robert Jones.